Oh, that's nice. I'm not gonna drink cough syrup like shots. I'm not gonna drink cough syrup like shots. I'm not gonna drink cough syrup like shots. No matter how tempting it might be. Okay. Tweet. They did tweet. Nice. And negative for the discords. Honestly, I don't know where else to post it. Okay. Just chatting screen. Hi everyone. This is my first reading stream for 2 weeks. Those of you who didn't know, I went to the hospital for blood clots in my lungs. It was not a pleasant experience by any means. I do not recommend. But it's why I've been out for so long. I did a couple of just touch-up streams while I was in the hospital. More just to show the rooms I was in and give you updates on what my health was like. And I've been out for just 2 weeks. About 2 weeks. It'll be 2 weeks tomorrow, I believe. But I've just missed reading and chatting so much. It's been driving me crazy. And, you know, it's not a big stretch. So, I'd like to say, I guess, officially back. I'm going back to Frankenstein tonight, and yeah, I think I only got one reading of Frankenstein even started before all this shit. That's why I'm only on chapter 4. Admittedly, that's the letters and 3 chapters. So we've done technically 4 chapters already. To recap, Frankenstein's made his creation. It did get out, and now it's in the wild and was progressing his way back to his home. So, I guess I can wait a little while longer for people to come in. It's telling me there's people here, but I don't believe it. If there's people here, by all means, feel free to throw up a sound alert or something. They're way down on my list. I'll just do my note because I'm that bored. Oh, there we go. Jump scare. Nice. Okay. I do actually think the sound alerts are turned off on my reading screen. I'd have to double check. Let me look at it real quick. I usually turn them off for the reads just because. Oh, it's reads. No, I actually have the sound alerts turned on my reading screen. Kind of crazy. It's kind of weird just see you guys throwing out the random horror sounds when I'm reading the first technical sci-fi novel. And all the more reasons to never say that women don't do sci-fi because they started it. I'm going to wait until 10 minutes into the stream before I jump over to the lab. So we got a little over a minute left. So I just wanted to, give you a recap of how things have been going. I'm breathing a lot better. Of course, me breathing just means that I started coughing and whatnot. I'll try not to cough too much during the stream while I'm reading, but I will admit that reading does kind of dry out my throat some. But we're doing Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. If you weren't here the first time I did it, I guess you've really seen the lab, so I will go ahead and switch over to that because I thought it was a pretty cool thing that I did. So, boom. So why don't you come up to the lab and see what's on the slab? Ooh. Yeah, I forgot. I do have sound effects going. Cool. Why is my mouth not working properly? Ah. Oh well. Okay. At least it's working. I had to fix my tripod last week. So we're 10 minutes in, so we will get started with the reading. Again, this is chapter 4. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld that accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of my life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom, with such infinite pains and care, I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. Hello! Where are they? His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same color as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion, and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years, for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this, I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now that I had finished, the beauty of my dream vanished, breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dream. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ensenblad. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held a corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. I started from my sleep in horror. A cold dew covered my forehead, my teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed, when by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain by the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me. but I escaped and rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had miserably given life. Oh, no mortal could support the horror that comes. A mummy again, endued with animation, could not be so hideous as that wretch. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of every artery. At others, I nearly sank to the ground through languor and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long as space were now become hell to me. The change was so rapid, the overthrow so complete. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned, and discovered to my sleepless and aching eyes the church of Insoldat, its white steeple and clock, which indicated the 6th hour. The porter opened the gates of the court, which had been that night been my asylum, and I issued into the streets, pacing them with quick steps, as if I sought to avoid the wretch whom I feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare return to the apartment which I inhabited, but felt impelled to hurry on, although wetted by the rain which poured from the black and comfortless sky. I continued walking in this manner for some time, endeavoring by bodily exercise to ease the load that weighed upon my mind. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear, and I hurried on with irregular steps, not daring to look about me. Like one who, on a lonely road, doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned around, walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. Continuing this, I came at length opposite to the inn in which various diligences and carriages usually stopped. Here I paused, I knew not why, but I remained some minutes with my eyes fixed on a coach that was coming towards me from the other end of the street. As it drew nearer, I observed that it was of the Swiss diligence. I stopped just where I was standing, and on the door being opened, I perceived Henry Clerval, who, on seeing me, instantly sprung out. "My dear Frankenstein!" he exclaimed. "How glad I am to see you! How fortunate that you will be here at the very moment of my alighting!" Nothing could equal my delight in seeing Clerval. His presence brought back to my thoughts of father, Elizabeth, and all those scenes of home so dear to my recollection. I grasped his hand, and in a moment forgot my horror and misfortune. I felt suddenly, for the first time during many months, calm and serene joy. I welcomed my friend, therefore, in the most cordial manner, and we walked towards my college. Clerval continued talking for some time about our mutual friends, and his own good fortune in being permitted to come to Ensoblat. "So you may believe," he said, "how great was the difficulty to persuade my father that it was not absolutely necessary for a merchant not to understand anything except bookkeeping, and, indeed, I believe I left him incredulous to the last, for his constant answer to my unwearied entreaties was the same that of the Dutch schoolmaster and the vicar in Wakefield. I have 10,000 florins a year without Greek. I eat heartily without Greek. But his affection for me at length overcame his dislike of learning, and he permitted me to undertake the voyage of discovery to the land of knowledge. It gives me greatest delight to see you. But tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth. Very well and very happy. Only a little uneasy that they hear from you so seldom. By the by, I mean to lecture you upon little on their account, but my dear Frankenstein, continued he, stopping short, and gazing full in my face, I did not before remark how very ill you appear, so thin and pale. You look as if you'd been watching for several nights. You have guessed right. I have lately been so deeply engaged in one occupation that I may have not allowed myself sufficient rest. As you see, but I sincerely hope, that all these employments are now at their end, and that I am at length free. I trembled excessively. I could not endure to think of it, and far much less allude to the occurrences of the preceding night. I walked with a quick pace, and we soon arrived at my college. Then I reflected, and thoughts made me shiver, that the creature whom I had left in my apartment might still be there, alive, and walking about. I dreaded to behold this monster, but I feared still more that Henry should see him. Entreating him, therefore, to remain a few minutes at the bottom of the stairs, I darted up towards my room. My hand was already on the lock of the door before I recollected myself. Then I paused. A cold shiver came over me. I threw the door forcibly open, as children are accustomed to do when they expect a spectre to stand in waiting for them on the other side. But nothing appeared. I stepped fearfully in. The apartment was empty, and my bedroom was also freed from the hideous guest. I could hardly believe that so great a good fortune could have befallen me. But when I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands with joy and ran down to Clerval. We ascended into my room, and the servant presently brought breakfast, but I was unable to contain myself. It was not joy only that possessed me. I felt my flesh tingle with excess of sensitiveness. My pulse beat rapidly. I was unable to remain for a single instant in the same place. I jumped over the chairs, clapped my hands, and laughed aloud. Clerval at first attributed my unusual spirits to joy on his arrival, but when he observed me more attentively, he saw a wildness in my eyes for which he could not account, and my loud, unrestrained, heartless laughter frightened and astonished him. "My dear Victor," cried he, "what, for God's sake, is the matter? Do you not laugh in this manner? How ill are you? What is the cause of all this?" "Do not ask me yet," cried I, putting my hands before my eyes, for I thought I saw the dreaded spectre glide into the room. "He can tell. Oh, save me, save me!" I imagined that a monster seized me, and I struggled furiously and fell down in a fit. Poor Clerval! What must have been his feelings? A meeting which he anticipated with such joy so strangely turned to bitterness. But I was not the witness of his grief, for I was lifeless, and did not recover my senses for a long, long time. This was the commencement of a nervous fever which confined me for several months. During all that time Henry was my only nurse. I afterwards learned that, knowing my father's advanced age and unfitness for so long a journey, and how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth, he spared them this grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. I knew that I could not have been more kind and attentive nurse than himself. Firm in the hope he felt of my recovery, he did not doubt that, instead of doing harm, they performed the kindest action that he could towards them. But I was really very ill, and surely nothing could but the unbound and unremitted attentions of my friend could have restored me to life. The form of the monster on whom I bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Doubtless my words surprised Henry. He at first believed them to be the wanderings of a disturbed imagination, but the pertinacity with which I continually recurred to the same subject persuaded him that my disorder indeed owed its origin to some uncommon and terrible events. By various low degrees, and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my friend, I recovered. I remember the first time I became capable of observing outward objects with any kind of pleasure. I perceived that the fallen leaves had disappeared, and that the young buds were shooting forth into the trees that shaded my window. It was a divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my own convalescence. I felt so. I felt also sentiments of joy and affection relieved in my bosom, and growth and gloom disappeared. And in a short time, I became as cheerful as I was before I was attacked by the fatal passion. Dearest Clerval, I exclaimed, how kind, how very good you are to me. This whole winter, instead of being spent in study as you promised yourself, you have been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? I feel the greatest remorse for the disappointment of which I have been the occasion, but you will forgive me? You will repay me entirely if you do not decompose yourself, but may get well as fast as you can. Since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on one subject, may I not? I trembled. One subject, what could it be? Could he allude to an object on whom I dared not even think? Compose yourself, said Clerval, who observed my change of color. I will not mention it if it agitates you, but your father and cousin would be very happy if they received a letter from you in your own handwriting. They hardly know how ill you have been, and are uneasy at your long silence. Is that all, my dear Henry? How could you suppose that my first thought would not fly towards those dear, dear friends whom I love, and who are so deserving of my love? If this is your present temper, my friend, you will perhaps be glad to see a letter that's been lying here some days for you. It is from your cousin, I believe. Are you having fun with the Trump scares? I do actually have a pretty loud in my ear still. I do get kind of focused when reading. Chapter 5. Clerval then put the following letter into my hands. To V. Frankenstein. My dear cousin, I cannot describe to you the uneasiness we all have concerning your health. We cannot help imagining that your friend Clerval conceals the extent of your disorder, for it is now several months since we have seen your handwriting, and all this time you have been obliged to dictate your letters to Henry. Surely, Victor, you must have been exceedingly ill. This makes us very well wretched. As much so nearly as your father, as much so nearly after the death of your dear mother. My uncle was almost persuaded that you were indeed dangerously ill, and could hardly be restrained from undertaking a journey to Ossingston. Clerval always writes that you are getting better. I eagerly hope that you will confirm this intelligence soon in your own handwriting, for indeed, Victor, we are all very miserable on this account. Relieve us from this fear. We shall be the happiest creatures in the world. Your father's health is now so vigorous that he appears 10 years younger since last winter. Ernest also is so much improved that you would hardly know him. He is now nearly 16 and has lost that sickly appearance which he had some years ago. He has grown quite robust and active. My uncle and I conversed a long time last night about what profession Ernest should follow. His constant illness when he was young deprived him of the habits of application, and now that he enjoys good health, he is continuously in the open air, climbing the hills or rowing on the lake. I therefore propose that he should be a farmer, which, you know, cousin, is a favorite scheme of mine. A farmer's is a very healthy, happy life, and the least hurtful, or rather most beneficial profession of any. My uncle had an idea of this being education as an advocate, that through his interests might become a judge. But besides that, he is not at all fitted for such an occupation. He is certainly more creditable to cultivate the earth and the sustenance of man than to be the confidant and sometimes the accomplice of his vices, which is the profession of a lawyer. I said that the employment of the preposterous farmer, if they were not more honorable, they were at least happier species of occupation than that of the judge, whose misfortune it was always to meddle with the dark side of human nature. My uncle smiled and said that I ought to be an advocate myself, which put an end to the conversation on that subject. And now I must tell you a story that will please and perhaps amuse you. Do you not remember Justine Moritz? Probably you do not. I will relate her history, therefore, in a few words. Madame Moritz, her mother, was a widow with 4 children, of whom Justine was the third. The girl had always been the favorite of her father, but through a strange perversity, her mother could not endure her, and after the death of Moritz, treated her very ill. My aunt observed this, and when Justine was 12 years of age, prevailed on her mother to allow her to live at our house. The republican institutions of our country have provided simpler and happier manners than those that prevail in the great monarchies that surround it. Hence there is less distinction between the several classes of its inhabitants, and the lower orders being neither poor nor so despised, their manners are more refined and moral. A servant in Geneva does not mean the same thing as a servant in France or England. True. Justine, thus received in our family, learns the duties of the servant, a condition which, in our fortunate country, does not include the idea of ignorance and the sacrifice of dignity of a human being. After what I have said, I dare say you will remember the heroine of our little tale. Justine was a great favorite of yours, and I recollect you once remarked that if you were in ill humor, one glance from Justine would dissipate it, for the same reason that Aristotle gives concerning the beauty of Angelica. She looked so frank-hearted and happy, my aunt conceived a great attachment for her, by which she was induced to give her an education superior to that which she was first intended. The benefit was fully repaid. Justine was the most grateful little creature in the world. I do not mean that she was made in any professions. I never heard her one pass her lips. But you could see by her eyes that she almost adored her protectress. Although her disposition was gay, and in many respects inconsiderate, yet she paid the greatest attention to every gesture of my aunt. She thought her the model of all excellence and endeavored to limit her phraseology and manners, so that even now she often reminds me of her. When my dearest aunt died, everyone was so much occupied by her own grief to notice poor Justine, who had attended her during her illness with most anxious affection. Poor Justine was very ill, but other trials were reserved for her. One by one her brothers and sister died, and her mother, with the exception of her neglected daughter, was left childless. The conscience of the woman was troubled. She began to think that the death of her favorites was a judgment from heaven to chastise her partiality. She was a Roman Catholic, and I believe her confessor confirmed the idea that she had conceived. Accordingly, a few months after your departure from Ingolstadt, Justine was called home by her repentant mother. Poor girl! She wept when she quitted our house. She was much altered since the death of our aunt. Grief had given softness to the winning mindlessness to her manners, which had before been remarkable for vivacity. Nor was her residence at her mother's house of the nature to restore her gaiety. The poor woman was very vacillating in her repentance. She sometimes begged Justine to forgive her unkindness, but much softer accused her of leaving caused the death of her brothers and sister. Bitch. Perpetually fretting at the length threw Madame Moritz into a decline, which at first increased her irritability, but she is now at peace forever. She died on the first approach of cold weather, at the beginning of this last winter. Justine has returned to us, and I assure you I love her tenderly. She is very clever and gentle, and extremely pretty, as I mentioned before. Her mien and her expressions continually remind me of my dear aunt. I must also say a few words to you, my dear cousin, of little darling William. I wish you could see him. He is very tall for his age, with sweet laughing blue eyes, dark eyelashes, and curling hair. When he smiles, two little dimples appear on each cheek, which are rosy with health. He has already had one or two little wives, but Louisa Byron being his favorite, a pretty little girl 5 years of age. Now, dear Victor, I dare say you wish to be indulged in a little gossip concerning the good people of Geneva. The pretty Miss Mansfield has already received the congratulatory visits on her approaching marriage with a young Englishman, John Melbourne, Esquire. Her ugly sister, Manon, married in Delbard, a rich banker. Last autumn, your favorite schoolfellow, Louis Manoir, had suffered several misfortunes since his departure from Clevel, Geneva. But he has already recovered his spirits, and is reported to be on the point of marrying a very lively, pretty Frenchwoman, Madame Tavernier. She is a widow and much older than Manoir, but she is very much admired and a favorite of everybody. I have written myself into good spirits, dear cousin, yet I cannot conclude without again anxiously inquiring concerning your health. Dear Victor, if you are not very ill, write yourself and make your father and all of us so happy, or I cannot bear to think of the other side of the question. My tears already flow. Adieu, my dearest cousin, Elizabeth of Asna, Geneva, March 18th, 1700. Dear, dear Elizabeth, I exclaimed when I read her letter. I will write instantly and relieve them of the anxiety they must feel. I wrote, and this exertion greatly fatigued me, but my convalescence had commenced and proceeded regularly. In another fortnight I was able to leave my chamber. One of my first duties on my recovery was to introduce Clerval to several professors at the university. In doing this, I underwent a kind of rough usage, ill befitting the wounds that my mind had sustained. Ever since the fatal night, the end of my labors, and the beginning of my misfortunes, I had conceived a violent antipathy, even to the name of natural philosophy. When I was otherwise quite restored to health, the sight of a chemical instrument could renew my agony of nervous symptoms. Henry saw this, and had removed all of my apparatus from my view. He had also changed my apartments, for he perceived that I had acquired a distaste for the room which had previously been my laboratory. But these cares of Clerval were made to no avail when I visited the professors. M. Waldman inflicted torture when he praised, with kindness and warmth. the astonishing progress I made in the sciences. He soon perceived that I disliked the subject, but not guessing the real cause, he attributed my feelings to modesty and changed the subject from my improvements to the science itself, with a desire, as evidently I saw, of drawing me out. What could I do? He meant to please, and he tormented me. I felt as if he had placed carefully, one by one, in my view, those instruments which were to be afterward used in putting me to a slow and cruel death. I writhed under his words, yet dared not exhibit the pain I felt. Clerval, whose eyes and feelings were always quick in discerning the sensations of others, declined the subject, alleging in excuse his total ignorance, and the conversation took a more general turn. I thanked my friend from my heart, but I did not speak. I saw plainly that he was surprised, but he never attempted to draw my secret from me, and although I loved him with a mixture of affection and reverence that knew no bounds, yet I could never persuade myself to confide to him that event which was so often present in my recollection, but which I feared to detail to another would only impress more deeply. And Kremke was not equally docile, and in my condition at the time of almost insupportable sensitivity, his harsh, blunt doctrines came to me more pain than the bewilderment appropriation of Ben Walmart. Damn the fellow, he cried. Why, M. Clerval, I assure you that he has outstripped us all. Ay, stare if you will please, but it is nevertheless true. A youngster who but a few years ago believed Cornelius Agrippa as firmly as the gospel has now set himself at the head of the university, and if he is not soon pulled down, we shall all be out of countenance. Ay, ay, continued he, observing my face expressive of suffering. M. Frankenstein is modest, the excellent quality in a young man. Young men should be different to themselves, you know, M. Clerval. I was myself when young, but that wears out after a very short time. Kremke had now commenced a eulogy on himself, which happily turned the conversation from the subject that was so annoying to me. Clerval was no natural philosopher. His imagination was too vivid for the minutiae of science. Languages were his principal study, and he sought, but acquiring their elements, to open a field of self-instruction on his return to Geneva. Persian, Arabic, and Hebrew gained his attention. Afterward, he had made himself perfectly master of Greek and Latin. For my own part, idleness had been irksome to me, and now I wished to fly from my reflection and hated my former studies and guides. I felt great relief in being a fellow pupil with my friend, and found not only instruction but consolation in the works of the Orientalists. Their melancholy is soothing, and the joy elevating to a degree I never experienced in studying the authors of any other country. When you read the writings, life appears to consist in a warm sun and garden of roses, and the smiles and frowns of a fair enemy, and in the fire that consumes your own heart. How different from the manly and heroically poetry of Greek and Romans. Summer passed away in these occupations, and my return to Geneva was fixed for the latter end of autumn. But being delayed by several accidents, winter and snow arrived. The roads were deemed impassable, and my journey was retarded until the ensuing spring. I felt this delay very bitterly, for I longed to see my native town and my beloved friends. My return had only been delayed so long as from an unwillingness to leave Clerval in a strange place, before he had become acquainted with any of its inhabitants. The winter, however, was spent cheerfully, and although the spring was commonly late when it came, its beauty compensated for its dilatoriness. The month of May had already commenced, and I expected the letter daily which was to fix the date of my departure. when Henry promised a pedestrian tour of the environs of Ingolstadt that I might bid a personal farewell to the country I had so long inhabited. I acceded with pleasure to this proposal. I was fond of exercise, and Clerval had always been my favorite companion in the rambles of this nature that I had taken among the scenes of my native country. We passed a fortnight in these perambulations. My health and spirit had long been restored, and they gained additional strength from the celebratorious air I breathed, the natural incidents of our progress, and the conversation of my friend. Study had before secluded me from the intercourse of my fellow creatures, and rendered me unsocial. But Clerval called forth the better feelings of my heart. He again taught me to love the aspect of nature and the cheerful faces of children. Excellent friend, how sincerely did you love me, and endeavor to elevate my mind, until it was on the level with your own. The selfish pursuit had cramped and narrowed me until the gentleness and affection of your warmth opened my senses. I became the same happy creature who, a few years ago, loving and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care. When happy, inanimate nature had the power of bestowing on me the most delightful sensations. A serene sky and verdant fields filled me with ecstasy. The present season was indeed divine. The flowers of spring bloomed on the hedges, while those in the summer were already in bud. I was undisturbed by thoughts which during the preceding year had pressed upon me, notwithstanding my endeavors to throw them off with the invincible burden. Henry rejoiced in my gaiety, and sincerely sympathized my feelings. He exerted himself to amuse me, while he expressed the sensations that filled his soul. The resources of his mind on the occasion were truly astonishing. His conversation was full of imagination, and very often, in imitation of the Persian and the Arabic writers, he invented tales of wonderful fancy and passion. At other times he repeated my favorite poems, and drew me out into arguments which he supported with great ingenuity. We returned to our college on Sunday afternoon. The peasants were dancing, and everyone we met were gay and happy. My own spirits were high. I bounded along with feelings of unbridled joy and hilarity. Hope everyone's enjoying the story. We are now going into chapter 6. Kind of cool. On my return, I found the following letter from my father to Vic Frankenstein. My dear Victor, you have probably waited impatiently for a letter to fix the date of your return to us, and I was at first tempted to write only a few lines, merely mentioning the day on which I would expect you. But that would be a cruel kindness, and I dare not do it. What would you, what would be your surprise, my son, when you expected a happy and gay welcome? Behold, on the contrary, tears and wretchedness. And now, Victor, can I relate our misfortune? Absence cannot be rendered, you callous to our joys and griefs, and how shall I inflict pain on an absent child? I wish to prepare you for the woeful news, but I know it is impossible. Even now your eye skims over the page to seek the words which are to convey to you the horrible tidings. William is dead. That sweet child, whose smiles delighted and warmed my heart, who was so very gentle and yet so gay. Victor, he is murdered. I will not attempt to console you, but will simply relate the circumstances of the transaction. Last Thursday, May 7th, I, my niece, and our two brothers went for a walk in the Plain Palace. The evening was warm and serene, and we prolonged our walk farther than usual. It was already dusk when we thought of returning, and then we discovered that William and Ernest, who had gone on before, were not to be found. We accordingly rested on the seat until they should return. Presently Ernest came and inquired if we had seen his brother. He said that they were been playing together, that William had run away to hide himself, and that he vainly sought for him, and afterwards waited for him a long time, that he did not return. This account rather alarmed us. We continued to search for him until night fell, when Elizabeth conjectured that he might have returned to the house. He was not there. We returned again with torches, for I could not rest when I thought that my sweet boy had lost himself and was exposed to all the damps and dews of the night. Elizabeth also suffered extreme anguish. About 5 in the morning I discovered my lovely boy, whom the night before had been blossoming and active in health, stretched on the grass, livid and motionless. The print of the murderer's fingers was on his neck. He was conveyed home, and the anguish that was visible in my countenance betrayed the secret to Elizabeth. She was very earnest to see the corpse. At first I attempted to prevent her, but she persisted, and entering the room where it lay, hastily examined the neck of the victim, and clasped her hand, and exclaimed, "Oh God, I have murdered my darling infant!" She fainted, and was restored to extreme difficulty. Once she again lived, it was only to weep and sigh. She told me that the same evening William had teased her to let him wear a very valuable miniature, whom she possessed of a mother. This picture is gone, and was doubtless the temptation which urged the murderer to the deed. We have no trace of him at present, although our exertions to discover him are unremitted, but they will not restore my beloved William. Come, dearest Victor, you alone can console Elizabeth. She weeps continually and excuses herself unjustly that as the cause of the death. Her words pierced my heart. We are all unhappy, but will not be an additional motive for you, son, to return to be our comforter. Your dear mother, alas, Victor, I now say, thank God that she did not live to witness the cruel and miserable death of her youngest darling. Home, Victor, not brooding thoughts of vengeance against the assassin, but with feelings of peace and gentleness that will heal instead of festering the wounds of our minds. Enter the house of mourning, my friend, but with kindness and affection for those who love you, not with hatred for your enemies. Your affectionate and afflicted father, Alphonse Frankenstein, Geneva, May 12th. Clerval, who had watched my countenance as I read the letter, was surprised to observe the despair that succeeded the joy that I first expressed on receiving news from my friends. I threw the letter on the table and covered my face with my hands. "My dear Frankenstein," exclaimed Henry, when he perceived me weep with bitterness, "are you always to be unhappy? My friend, what has happened?" I motioned to him to take up the letter, while I walked up and down the room with extreme agitation. Tears also gushed from the eyes of Clerval as he read the account of my misfortune. "I can offer you no consolation, my friend," he said. "Your disaster is irreparable. What do you intend to do?" "To go instantly to Geneva. Come with me, Henry, to order the horses." During our walk, Clerval endeavored to raise my spirits. He did not do this by common topics of consolation, but by exhibiting truth and sympathy. "Poor William," he said, "that dear child. Now he sleeps with his angel mother. His friends mourn and weep, but he is at rest. He does not know, not now feel the murderer's grasp. Sod covers his tranquil form, and he knows no pain. He can no longer be a fit subject for pity. The survivors are the greatest sufferers, and for them time is the only consolation. Those maxims of the Stoics, that death was no evil, and that the mind of man ought to be superior to despair, and the eternal absence of a beloved object ought not to be urged. Even Cato wept over the dead body of his brother." Clerval spoke thus as we hurried through the streets. The words impressed themselves on my mind, and I remembered them afterwards in solitude. But now, as soon as the horses arrived, I hurried into the carriage and bade farewell to my friend. My journey was very melancholy. At first I wished to hurry on, for I longed to console and sympathize with my loved and sorrowing friends. But when I drew near my native town, I slackened my progress. I could hardly sustain the multitude of feelings that crowded into my mind. I passed through scenes familiar to my youth, but which I had not seen for nearly 6 years. How altered everything might have been during that time. One sudden and desolating change had taken place, where a thousand little circumstances might have, by degrees, worked other alterations which, although they were done more tranquilly, might not be less decisive. Fear overcame me. I dared not advance, dreading a thousand nameless evils that made me tremble, although I was unable to define them. I remained 2 days at Lausanne, in the painful state of my mind. I contemplated the lake. The waters were placid, all calm around, and the snowy mountain. Houses of nature were not changed. By degrees, the calm and heavenly scene restored me, and I continued my journey towards Geneva. The road ran by the side of the lake, which became narrower as I approached my native town. I discovered more distinctly the black sides of Jura and the bright summit of Mont Blanc. I wept like a child. Dear mountains, my own beautiful lake, how do you welcome your wanderer? Your summits are clear, and the sky and lake are blue and placid. Is this to prognosticate peace, or to mock at my unhappiness? I fear, my friend, that I shall render myself tedious by dwelling on the preliminary circumstances. But they were days of comparative happiness, and I think of them with pleasure. My country, my beloved country, who but a native can tell the delight I took in again beholding thy streams, the mountains, and more than all, thy lovely lake. Yet, as I drew nearer home, grief and fear again overcame me. Night also closed around, and when I could hardly see the dark mountains, I felt still more gloomily. The picture appeared a vast and dim scene of evil, and I foresaw obscurely that I am destined to become the most wretched of human beings. Alas, I prophesied truly, failed only in one single circumstance, that in all the misery I imagined and dreaded, I did not conceive the hundredth part of the anguish I was destined to endure. It was completely dark when I arrived in the environs of Geneva. The gates of the town were already shut, but I was obliged to pass the night in Selsham, a village half a league to the east of the city. The sky was serene, and I was unable to rest. I resolved to visit the spot where my poor William had been murdered. I could not pass through the town. I was obliged to cross the lake on the boat route to Inverness. During the short voyage, I saw the lightnings playing on the summit of Mont Blanc, and the most beautiful figures. The storm appeared to approach rapidly, and on landing I ascended a low hill that I might observe its progress. In its advance, the heavens were closed. Then I soon felt the rain coming more slowly in large drops, but its violence quickly increased. I quitted my seat and walked on, although the darkness of the storm increased every minute, and thunder burst in a terrific crash over my head. It was echoed by Shelley, the Juras, and the Alps of Savoy. Vivid flashes of lightning dazzled my eyes, illuminating the lake, making it appear like a vast sheet of fire. Then, for an instant, everything seemed for a pitchy darkness, until the eye recovered itself from the preceding flash. The storm, as it is often the case in Switzerland, appeared at once in various parts of the heavens. The most violent storm hung exactly north of the town, over the part of the lake which lies between the promontory of Bellevue and the village of Capet. Another storm enlightened Jura with faint flashes, and another darkened, sometimes as close to the mole, peaked mountain to the east of the lake. While I watched the storm, so beautiful yet terrific, I wandered with a hasty step. This noble war in the sky elevated my spirits. I clasped my hands and exclaimed loudly, "William, dear angel, this is thy funeral, this thy dirge." As soon as I said these words, I perceived in the gloom a figure which stole from behind a clump of trees near me. I stood fixed, gazing intently. I could not be mistaken. A flash of lightning illuminated the object, and discovered its shape plainly to me. Its gigantic stature, and its deformity of its aspect, more hideous, belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life. What did he there? Could he be, I shuddered at the conception, the murderer of my brother? No sooner did that idea cross my imagination than I became convinced of its truth. My teeth chattered, and I was forced to lean against a tree for support. The figure passed me quickly, and I lost it in the gloom. Noting the inhuman shape could have destroyed that fair child. He was the murderer. Could not doubt it. The bare presence of the idea was irresistible proof of the fact. I thought of pursuing the devil, but it would have been in vain. Another flash discovered him to be hanging among the rocks, so nearly perpendicular since we must leave, a hill that bounds the plain to the south. We soon reached the summit and disappeared. I remained motionless. The thunder crashed, but the rain continued. The scene was enveloped in a perpetual darkness. I resolved in my mind the events which I had now sought to forget, the whole train of my progress towards creation, the appearance of my work in my own hands alive at my bedside, its departure. 2 years had now nearly elapsed since the night on which he first received life. Was this his first crime? Alas, I turned loose in the world in a wretched grave, the depraved wretch, whose delight was in carnage and misery. Had he not murdered my brother? No one can conceive the anguish I suffered during the remainder of the night, which I spent cold and wet in the open air. But I did not feel the inconvenience of the weather. My imagination was busy in scenes of evil and despair. I considered the being whom I had cast among mankind, and endowed with the will and power to effect purposes of horror, such as the deed which he had now done, nearly in the light of my own vampire. My own spirit let loose from the grave, forced to destroy all that was dear to me. Day dawned, and I directed my steps towards the town. The gates were open, and I hastened to my father's house. My first thought was being charged with the fact. The poor girl confirmed the suspicion of great measure by her extreme confusion of manner. This was a strange tale, but it did not shake my faith, and I replied earnestly, "You are all mistaken. I know the murderer, Justine, poor Justine, is innocent." At that instant my father entered. I saw unhappiness deeply impressed on his countenance, and he endeavored to welcome me cheerfully, and after we had exchanged our mournful greeting, would have introduced some other topic than that of the great disaster, had not Ernest exclaimed, "Good God, Papa! Victor says he knows who the murderer was." We do also, unfortunately, replied my father, for indeed I'd rather been forever ignorant than I discovered much depravity and ingratitude in what I value so highly. My dear father, you're mistaken. Justine is innocent. If she is, God forbid that she should suffer as guilty. She is to be tried today, and I sincerely hope that she will be acquitted. This speech calmed me. I was firmly convinced in my own mind that Justine, and indeed every human being, was guiltless of this murder. I had to fear, therefore, that any circumstantial evidence could be brought forward strong enough to convict her, and in this assurance I calmed myself, expecting the trial with eagerness, but without prognostication of evil insult. We soon joined by Elizabeth. Time had made great alterations in her form, and I at last beheld her. 6 years before, she had been a pretty, good-humored girl, whom everyone loved and caressed. She was now a woman in stature, in expression, and countenance, which was uncommonly lovely. An open and capricious forehead gave indication of good understanding, joined to great frankness of disposition. Her eyes were hazel, and expressive of mildness, now through recent affliction allied to sadness. Her hair was of a dark, rich auburn, her complexion fair, her figure slight and graceful. She welcomed me with great affection. Your arrival, my dear cousin, she said, fills me with hope. You perhaps will find some means to justify my poor guiltless Justine. Alas, who is safe if she is convicted of the crime? I rely on her innocence as certainly as I do my own. Our misfortune is doubly hard for us. We have not only lost a lovely darling boy, but this poor girl, whom I sincerely love, to be torn away even by a worse fate. If she is condemned, I will never know joy. But she will not. I am sure she will not. And then I will be happy again, even after the sad death of my little William. She is innocent, my Elizabeth, I said, and that shall be proved. Fear nothing, but let your spirits be cheered by the assurance of her acquittal. How kind you are. Everyone else believes in her guilt. That made me feel wretched, for I knew that it was impossible. But to see everyone else prejudiced in so deadly a manner rendered me hopeless and despairing, she wept. Sweet niece, said my father, dry your tears. If she is, as you believe, innocent, rely on the justice of our judges, the activity with which I shall prevent the slightest shadow of partiality. Okay, chapter 7. We passed a few sad hours until 11 o'clock, when the trial was to commence. My father and the rest of the family being obliged to attend as witnesses, I accompanied them to the courts. During the whole of this wretched mockery of justice, I suffered living torture. It was to be decided whether the result of my curiosity and lawless devices would be the cause of death of my two fellow beings. One, a smiling babe, full of innocence and joy, and the other, far more dreadfully murdered, with every aggravation of infamy that could make murder memorable and horror. Justine also was a girl of merit. She possessed qualities which promised to render her life happy. Now all was to be obliterated in an ignominious grave, and I the cause. 1,000 times rather I would have confessed myself guilty of the crime described Justine, but I was absent when it was committed. Such declaration would have been considered the ravings of a madman, and would not have been exculpated who suffered through me. The appearance of Justine was calm. She was dressed in mourning, and her countenance, always engaging, was rendered by the solemn of her feelings and exquisite beauty. She was appeared confident in her innocence, and did not tremble. Although gazed upon and exorcised thousands, for all the kindness which her beauty might otherwise have excited was obliterated in the minds of the spectators by the imagination of the enormity she was supposed to have committed. She was tranquil, yet her tranquillity was evidently strained, and her confusion had been before deducted to the proof of guilt. She worked up in her mind to the appearance of courage. When she entered the court, she threw her eyes around it and quickly discovered there were where we were seated. A tear seemed to dim in her eye as she saw us, but she quickly recovered herself. The look of sorrowful affection seemed to attest her utter guiltlessness. The trial began, and after the advocate against her stated the charge, several witnesses were called. Several strange facts combined against her, which might have staggered any one of those who had not been proof of her senses I had. She had been out the whole of the nights on which the murder had been committed, and towards morning had been perceived by a market woman not far from the spot where the body of the murdered child had been afterwards found. The woman asked her what she did there, but she looked very strangely and only returned a confused and unintelligible answer. She returned to the house at 8 o'clock, and when one inquired where she had been for nights, she replied that she had been looking for the child, and demanded earnestly if anything had been heard concerning him. When shown the body, she fell into violent hysterics, and kept her bed for several days. A picture was then produced, which the servant had found in her pockets, and when Elizabeth, in a faltering voice, proved that it was the same picture, an hour before the child had been missed, she had placed around his neck. A murmur of horror and indignation filled the court. Justine was called on for her defense. As the trial proceeded, she recounted and altered. Surprise, horror, and misery were very strongly expressed. Sometimes she struggled with her tears, but when she was able to plead, she collected her powers and spoke in an audible, although variable voice. God knows, she said, how entirely I am innocent, but I do not pretend that my protestation should acquit me. I rest my innocence on the plain and simple explanation of the facts which have been adduced against me, and I hope the character I have always borne will incline the judges to favorable interpretation, where any circumstances appear doubtful or suspicious. Then she related that, by the permission of Elizabeth, she had passed the evening and the night of the murder was committed at the house of her aunt Shelley, a village situated about a league from Geneva. On her return, at about 9 o'clock, she met a man who asked her if she had seen anything of the child who was lost. She was alarmed by the account, and passed several hours looking for him. The gates of Geneva were shut, and she was forced to remain several hours of the night in the barn belonging to a cottage. Being unwilling to call up the inhabitants to whom she was well known. Unable to rest or sleep, she quitted the asylum early, that she might again endeavor to find my brother. If she had gone near the spot where his body lay, it was without her knowledge. That she had been bewildered and questioned by the market woman was not surprising, since she had passed a sleepless night, and the fate of poor William was yet uncertain. Concerning the picture, she could give no account. I know, continued the unhappy victim, how heavily and fatally this one circumstance weighs against me, but I have no power of explaining it, and when I have expressed my utter ignorance, I am only left with conjecture concerning the probabilities by which it might have been placed in my pockets. But here I am, checked. I believe that I have no enemy on earth, and none surely would have been so wicked as to destroy me wantonly. Did the murderer place it there? I know of no opportunity afforded him for doing it so. Why should he be stolen the Jew Jewel to part with it again so soon. I commit my cause to the justice of the judges, yet I see no room for hope. I beg permission to have a few witnesses examine concerning my character, and if the testimony shall not overweigh my supposed guilt, I must be condemned, although I would pledge my salvation on my innocence. Several witnesses were called who had known her for many years, and they spoke well of her. But fear and hatred of crime of which they supposed her guilty rendered them timorous and unwilling to come forward. Elizabeth saw even this last resource, her excellent dispositions and irreproachable conduct, but to fail the accused when, although violently agitated, she desired permission to address the court. "I am," said she, "the cousin of the unhappy child who was murdered, or rather his sister, for I was educated by and have lived with his parents ever since, and even long before his birth. It may be, therefore, judgment indecent in me to come forward on this occasion. But when I see a fellow creature about to perish through the cowardice of her pretended friends, I wish to be allowed to speak, that I may say what I know of her character. I am well acquainted with the accused. I have lived in the same house with her, at one time for 5, and at another for 2 years. During all of that period she appeared to me the most amicable and benevolent of human creatures. She nursed Madame Frankenstein, my aunt, in her last illness with the greatest affection and care, and afterwards attended her own mother during her tedious illness in a manner that excited the admiration of all who knew her. After which she again lived in my uncle's house, where she was beloved by all the family. She was warmly attached to the child who is now dead, and I acted towards him like the most affectionate mother. For my own part, I do not hesitate to say that, notwithstanding all the evidence produced against her, I believe and rely on her perfect innocence. She had no temptation for such an action. As to the bauble on which the chief proof rests, if she had earnestly desired it, I should have willingly given it to her. So much do I esteem and value her." "Excellent, Elizabeth." The murmur of approbation was heard, but it was excited by her generous interference, and not in favor of poor Justine, on whom the public indignation was turned with renewed violence, charging her the backseat blackest of gratitude. She herself wept as Elizabeth spoke, but she did not answer. My own agitation and anguish was extreme during the whole trial. I believed in her innocence. I knew it. Could the demon, who had, I did not for a minute doubt, murdered my brother, also in this hellish sport have betrayed the innocent to death and ignominy? I could not sustain the horror of leaving my situation, when I perceived that the popular voice and the countenances of the judges had already condemned my unhappy victim. I rushed out of the court in agony. The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. Backed it up. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom, and would not forego their hold. I passed the night of unmingled wretchedness. In the morning I went to the court. My lips and throat were parched. I dared not ask for the fatal question, but I was known, and the officer guessed the cause of my visit. The ballots had been thrown. They were all black, and Justine was condemned. I cannot pretend to describe what I then felt. I had before experienced sensations of horror, and I have endeavored to bestow upon them adequate expressions, but words cannot convey an idea of the heart-sickening despair that I then endured. The person to whom I addressed myself added that Justine had already confessed her guilt. That evidence, he observed, was hardly required in so glaring a case, but I am glad of it, and indeed none of our judges like to condemn a criminal on circumstantial evidence, be it ever so decisive. When I returned home, Elizabeth eagerly demanded the result. My cousin, I replied, it is decided as you may have expected. All the judges had rather that 10 innocents should suffer, that one guilty should escape. But she has confessed. This was a dire blow to poor Elizabeth, who had relieved the firmness of Justine's innocence. Alas, she said, how shall I ever again believe in human benevolence? Justine, whom I love and esteem as my sister, how could she put on those smiles of innocence only to betray? Her mild eyes seemed incapable of any severity or ill humor, and yet she has committed a murder. Soon after, we heard that the poor victim had expressed a wish to see my cousin. My father wished her not to go, but said that he left it to her own judgment and feelings to decide. Yes, said Elizabeth, I will go, although she is guilty, and you, Victor, shall accompany me. I cannot go alone. The idea of this visit was torture to me, yet I could not refuse. We entered the gloomy prison chamber, and beheld Justine sitting on some straw at the further end. Her hands were manacled, and her head rested on her knees. She rose on seeing us enter, and when we were left alone with her, she threw herself at the feet of Elizabeth, weeping bitterly. My cousin wept also. "Oh, Justine," she said, "why did you rob me of my last consolation? I relied on your innocence, and although I was very wretched, I was not so miserable as I am now. And do you also believe that I am very, very wicked? Do you also join with the enemies to crush me?" Her voice was suffocated with sobs. "Rise, my poor girl," said Elizabeth. "Why do you kneel, if you are innocent? I am not one of your enemies. I believed your guiltlessness, notwithstanding every evidence, till I heard that you yourself had declared your guilt. The report, you say, is false. And be assured, dear Justine, that nothing can shake my confidence in you for a moment, but your own confession. I did confess, but I confessed a lie. I confessed. I confessed that I might obtain absolution. But now that falsehood lies heavier on my heart than all my other sins, the God of heaven forgive me. Ever since I was condemned, my confessor has besieged me. He threatened, he menaced, until I almost began to think that I was the monster that he said I was. He threatened excommunication and hellfire in my last moments if I continued to obdurate. Dear lady, I had none to support me. All looked on as me as a wretch doomed to ignominy and perdition. What could I do? In an evil hour I subscribed to a lie, and now I am only truly miserable. She paused, weeping, and then continued. I thought with horror, my sweet lady, that you should believe your Justine, whom your blessed aunt had so highly honored, and whom you loved, was a creature capable of a crime which none but the devil himself could have perpetrated. Dear William, dearest blessed child, I soon shall see you again in heaven, where we shall be happy, but that consoles me, and I am going to suffer ignominy and death. Oh, Justine, forgive me for having for one moment distrusted you. Why did you confess? But do not mourn, my dear girl. I will everywhere proclaim your innocence and force belief. Yet you must die. You, my playfellow, my companion, my more than sister. I never can survive so horrible misfortune. Dear, sweet Elizabeth, do not weep. You ought to raise me with the thoughts of a better life, and elevate me from the petty cares of this world of injustice and strife. Do not you, excellent friend, drive me to despair. I will try to conform you, but this, I fear, is an evil too deep and poignant to admit consolation, for there is no hope. Yet heaven bless thee, my dearest Justine. with resignation, and a confidence elevated beyond this world. Oh, how I hate the shrews and mockeries. When one creature is murdered and another is immediately deprived of life in the slow, torturing manner, then the executioners, their hands yet reckoning with blood of innocents, believe that they have done a great deed. They call this retribution. Hateful name. When that word is pronounced, I know greater and more horrid punishments are going to be inflicted than the gloomiest tyrant has ever invented to satiate his utmost revenge. Yet this is not consolation for you, my Justine, unless indeed that you are the glory of escaping from such a miserable den. Alas, I would I were in peace with my aunts and my lovely William, escaped from a world which is hateful to me, and the visitors of men which I abhor. Justine smiled languidly. This, dear lady, is despair, and not resignation. I must not learn the lesson that you would teach me. Talk of something else, something that will bring peace and not increase of misery. During this conversation, I had retired to a corner of the prison room where I could conceal the horrid anguish that possessed me. Despair. Who dared talk of that? The poor victim. On the morning when I was dreary born on the past the dreary boundary between life and death, felt not as I did. Such deep and bitter agony. I gnashed my teeth and ground them together, uttering a groan that came from my inmost soul. Justine started. When she saw who it was, she approached me and said, "Dear sir, you are very kind to visit me. I hope, do not believe that I am guilty." I could not answer her. "No, Justine," said Elizabeth. "He is more convinced of your innocence than I was, for even when he heard that you had confessed, he did not credit it. I truly thank him. In these last moments I feel the sincerest gratitude towards those who think of me with kindness. How sweet is the affection of others to so wretched as I am. It removes more than half my misfortune, and I feel as if I could die in peace, now that the innocence is acknowledged by you, dear lady, and your cousin." Thus the poor sufferer tried to comfort others and herself. She indeed gained the resignation she desired. But I, the true murderer, felt a never-dying worm alive in my bosom, which allowed with no hope or consolation. Elizabeth also wept, and was unhappy, for hers also was a misery of innocence, which, like a cloud that passes over the fair moon, for a while hides, but cannot tarnish its brightness. Anguish and despair had penetrated into the core of my heart. I bore a hell within me, which nothing could extinguish. We stayed several hours with Justine, and it was with great difficulty that Elizabeth could tear herself away. "I wish," cried she, "that I were to die with you. I cannot live in this world of misery." Justine assumed an air of cheerfulness, while she was with difficulty repressed with bitter tears. She embraced Elizabeth and said, in a voice of half suppressed emotion, "Farewell, sweet lady, dearest Elizabeth, my beloved and only friend. May heaven in its bounty bless and preserve you. May this be the last misfortune that you will ever suffer. Live and be happy, and make others so." As we returned, Elizabeth said, "You know not, my dear Victor, how much I am relieved, now that I trust the innocence of this misfortunate girl. I never could again have known peace if I had been deceived by my reliance on her. For the moment that I did believe her guilty, I felt an anguish that I could not have long sustained. Now my heart is lightened. The innocent suffers, but she whom I thought amiable and good was not betrayed my trust and reposed in her, and I am consoled. Amiable cousin, such were your thoughts, mild and gentle at your own dear eyes and voice. But I was a wretch, and none ever conceived of the misery that I then endured. Ouch. Oh man, that's chapter 7. I think I'm gonna go ahead and call it for the night because my voice is really getting there. So, thank you all for being here. Uh, I hope you like the story. It's and Frankenstein, so I can't really take much credit for it. Let's see. Find someone online we can raid. We got. Oh, let's see. Penguins playing Dota. Death Walker's on. I don't have any suggestions. Oh. Check and see what people are doing. It's off. No idea what to write out, but the birthday candle just came up. Ouch. So many people have told me. I think I'm also reading stories. So it's reading Twilight. That's not good there. uh, ouch. So much for trying to find some grade. Guess we can break the candle. Okay. Yeah. That's right after the candle. It's her birthday, might as well. Okay. Thank you all for coming in tonight. Have a good evening. And, if you're here and you want to wish her a happy birthday, by all means, let's go wish her a happy birthday. So, have a good night, Cubs.